welcome back. Thank you for your questions, and that's excellent because that's what I'm trying to get people to do, to kind of go, but hold on, what about this, what about that, what about this, what about that? Hopefully the next couple of slides will answer some of the issues that have been brought up. So we'll have a look at this. This is the question. Things that just exist and move and change without explaining the past. And what I'm trying to explain to you is that the contents of our mind change. That's the only way we know something happened. It's very odd, it's unnerving. It's like that thing I was showing you about vision. One of the problems with a persistent illusion is it's actually unnerving to see through it, because we're so used to seeing the world a certain way. And what I'm saying is that whatever we talk about, whenever we think we're talking about the past, we're really accessing the contents of our minds.
But it still happens. It still happens.
This is the problem. If you remember the picture, yeah, it happened. The question is this: is there a record of it? If
you got Alzheimer's and you didn't remember it at all, doesn't it say it didn't happen, does it?
No, I agree, it happened, and there's a record of it, or there isn't a record of it somewhere. But what I'm saying is, my keys are in my pocket. But is World War II in the past? Or is this just grammatics? Is this just semantics? And don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-semantic. But this is the point, thank you. Because sometimes people will say that what I'm doing is I'm playing a semantic game, that I'm talking about the same thing in different words. And I'm saying, no. If you believe in time, and don't forget, things like the Large Hadron Collider, you know, the thing they show you in CERN in Sweden that's chucking particles around, they will talk about time. The people who run that machine will talk about time all the time. NASA will talk about time. And they won't ever say, well, it's just an idea that we use as handy. Of course there's no past, of course there's no future. There's a thing called quantum mechanics, which I know virtually nothing about, but in quantum mechanics, they say that a particle might actually borrow energy from the future to do a certain thing. So they're saying time is so real and tangible that this particle might be able to borrow energy from a millionth of a second in the future, as long as it pays it back. And Hawking is saying that you could perhaps fire a bullet into the past. And you can't fire a bullet into the past unless the past exists. And it's recorded or exists or is created somewhere. So yes, things happen and they've happened. I agree with that completely. But what I'm saying is if there is a record of it, if it does exist somewhere, then it does exist somewhere. But if it doesn't exist anywhere, then it doesn't exist anywhere. But if it doesn't exist anywhere, then it doesn't exist. And if it doesn't exist, then there's no time, because the time has got the past and the future. Time is only a useful notion or idea. I agree that it's a useful notion or idea. Money is a very useful notion or idea, but you'll never actually find money. You'll find bits of paper, you'll find magnetic numbers on discs, you'll find round pieces of metal. You know, was that monopoly money or not? If only the dealers had gone, wow, we're rich, and convinced some other people to build a house and exchange their money, they would have all kicked off. We'd all be millionaires. The present. Let's get something easier. You were asking me about how things move, blah, 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 blah. We say things take time to move, and that things happen over time, but what do we really mean? We say a car does 100 miles an hour. This is 100 miles. I've got a picture of it very accurately. This is 1 hour. I have a hand that goes round a clock. This is a car, my own personal car, because I've used it for pictures. But all we actually observe is that cars move and the earth spins. That seems to be an outrageous statement. Because when we talk to someone and we say that a car is doing 100 miles an hour, I can tell you that over the phone and you'd understand it. I got done for speeding, I was doing 100 miles an hour. Now miles exist and cars exist, and speed exists, so it makes sense that hours exist. The whole thing ties up together, 100 miles an hour, no question about it. But what we observe is that the earth spins and the cars move. It so happens that a point on the equator of the earth moves around 1,000 miles an hour. Now it's tricky what I'm saying here is this. The earth is actually about 25,000 miles around. There are 24 hours in a day. So if you do the maths, it travels a little bit over 1,000 miles an hour. The problem is if you were to ask someone how long an hour is, they'd say it's the time that it takes a point in the equator to travel 1,000 miles. What we really observe is that the earth spins and the cars move. We could call that hour 15 degrees. So, In other words, we could express our speed of the car by saying the car travels 1/10 the speed of the point on the equator, and that would be completely legitimate. We have signs on the road that says, warning, speed limit, 0.7 speed of the equator, or 0.25 speed of the equator. You could have it and it would be legitimate. And the difference is that when you talk about speed in this way, you don't use hours. You're just saying this is travelling a certain percentage of the speed of something else. Ultimately, you could compare it to the speed of light if you wanted to do that. So what's the difference between talking about miles per hour or 1/10 the speed of a point on the equator? It's not semantics, that big list of all the things I'm talking about. If you believe in time, you believe there's a past and present and future and an interval and durations and all this kind of stuff. It's not semantics. Miles per hour suggests that miles and hours exist, which implies that time exists, which implies that time is something that is needed for things to move. I can't get to Birmingham unless I've got at least 2 hours. What do you want about? Where are these 2 hours? Where did you get them from? What if you've got petrol but no hours? Will your car still start? I don't know. Time suggests that the past and the future exist. So just by saying this miles per hour, we've slipped in this word hour, almost like a con man. It's actually just a little number that we use. We could say miles per 15 degrees, because the Earth rotates 15 degrees. The car does 100 miles per 15 degrees, whatever.
Surely it would do 1,100 miles.
Yes, yeah. And I've simplified this. If you notice, this tree is
if
a
you're
little
going
bit...
in that direction, if you're going the other direction, then you might do only 900 miles an hour.
No. This is no. You can mix the two things up. Forget where this car's doing its 100 miles an hour. What I'm saying is this: if you just look at the planet, a point on the equator will be doing about 1,100 miles an hour. I've simplified the numbers. If you actually go higher and higher, you'll see that tree will just be standing on a spot, spinning round and round. You can choose your speed, whatever. So I'm just comparing the two speeds. Don't try and mix up the idea that the car's going up here while it's going there. That'll get far too confusing. And I've simplified the maths. So it implies, miles per hour implies that miles and hours and time exist in the past and future and all this kind of stuff. If you just say something's travelling at 1/10 the speed of the point on the equator, you can convey the speed completely legitimately to anyone else. You could phone someone up on the moon and tell them, yeah, I was doing 1/10 the speed of that, whatever. But all it implies is that things can exist, the car on the Earth, and that things can move, and that we can compare their speeds. So we start off by assuming that miles per hour is a proof that time exists and that it's needed for things to move. But we end up realising, no, all we're doing is comparing the motion of two things. And all we ever do, it's kind of frustrating for me because all I'm saying is, look, what do you constantly observe? You observe things here now moving, that's it. And we compare their speeds. I've never seen one of these hours. I've seen bits of plastic go around a clock face, but I've never seen an hour. Usain Bolt does 100 metres in about 10 seconds, but if you ever were to get a clock, one of those big clocks, and look at it, you'd find that 10 seconds is probably about 100 millimetres. So what we're really saying is Usain Bolt travels 100,000 times further and faster than the second hand of a clock, or vice versa. You can compare your clock to him. You're just comparing the motion and distance of two things. And it's always just happening now, in my opinion. But when we call these seconds, and we call these meters, we start thinking that seconds exist as well as meters. But really, these are just millimeters. It's just a thing moving. It's just a thing moving. If you take the batteries out of this, it'll stop. If you take the cornflakes out of that, it'll stop. We all need energy to move. And that's all you're ever seeing. Whenever you see something move, whenever you think you see the future arriving, you're really seeing energy being released. We will cover this in a second. So all we observe is that the Earth constantly spins. We say night follows day, but if you went out in space, you just see this thing constantly spinning. This here, I always get it confused about the way the Earth spins. It spins that way. All right. So this here would be the sunrise and the sunset. But this actually here is the sunrise. That place. And if you hovered there in a spaceship, you could just sit and watch the sunrise from there. It's just a place. It's not a time. This is my watch. I actually brought it along here. Blah blah blah. It's a 24-hour watch. It's got all these hands. I've taken these ones off using Photoshop. You can see around here it's got the numbers all the way around to 24. And this hand just spins at the same rate that that thing spins, and that's why it's useful. If you get this one and you point that hand at the sun, the 12 would always point to north or vice versa or something like it. If you got this watch and you went on the North Pole and you set it up so that hand is pointing at the sun, that hand would just constantly point at the sun. It moves at the same speed the Earth spins. These hands just move at fractions of that because we're used to it happening. But that's another layer of confusion. It always bugs me that the third hand on a watch is called the second hand. It drives me mad. They say things take time to happen. So imagine if we got 4 pots of water and we put them on a stove and we left them there for a day or a week or a month or a year or 1,000 years. Well, unless the room was particularly warm, nothing would happen. They would just sit there doing nothing. You could argue that in reality they would evaporate. But that's because if you look down the road, you'll see there's a massive ball of fire about 100 million miles away. It's like us standing next to a fireplace and going, it's warm in here. You go, yeah, you're sitting near a fire. This is all sitting near a fire. We're all just got a massive nuclear explosion, i.e. the sun, going on constantly. So if you actually did this, yes, these would evaporate. But if you did it in a very cold room, they would just sit there forever. So you give them as much time as you want and nothing would happen. However, the moment you connect a bit of gas, suddenly everything starts changing. So apparently we don't just need time for things to change, we need time and we need energy. What you would find if you put these flames underneath the pots is that precisely at the place where the flame hits the pot, things would start to change. You might want to call it the time. You might say, oh, we started it at 14 minutes past whatever. But all you're doing is you're looking at this thing for some reason. I don't know why you look at that thing. It's just the motor, it's just the hand going around. So you've got this gas coming out. Wherever the flame actually hits the pot, things will happen. You put some dye in there and you start to see a stream of dye lifting up. If the pot was misplaced, you wouldn't see the dye lift up over here, you'd only see it lift up over here. If you set these rings at different rates, that one off, that one low, that one higher, that one even higher, you'd find that they evaporate faster. So we say that things take time to move, but it's very odd that with just time, nothing at all happens. But as soon as you introduce energy, things start happening in direct proportion to how much energy you push in. So time is like a mate who doesn't actually do anything, but apparently is very helpful. So I'm saying, it's just not fair. You can't go, yeah, no, it's this invisible thing in a 4th dimension that goes on endlessly in one direction that we can't see, and it doesn't do anything unless you have a bottle of gas kicking around. I go, well, I still don't see what this thing in time is meant to be or be doing. In my opinion, it's all related to energy, as we will see. And saying energy has to be released over time is just not saying anything. So if objects in the world could just exist, move and interact, would this explain what we attribute to the present? Discuss. Does anyone have any questions? Good. Let's move on to the future. If you go down to your local park and you want to sit there and you want to see the future constantly arriving, all you will actually see is things constantly moving and changing. If you've got this idea in your head that there's a thing called time, and there's a thing called the future that arrives, and there's a thing called the past that recedes, you will interpret this as the future constantly arriving, but it'd be very odd because you'll only ever see this moment of it. And if you buy into the whole time thing, you go, yes, it's because this is an infinitely thin moment of time, sandwiched between this massive but invisible future and this massive but invisible past. And I've only got a couple of problems. How can something be infinitely thin, and why are all these massive things invisible? You know, if I'm allowed to go around making up things like that for my argument, I could have us all out of here in 2 minutes. Clouds move. Anyone ever seen a cloud move backwards, or do they always seem to move forwards? It's an odd thing with time that we say that time constantly moves forwards, but everything moves forwards. If I get the stick and I move it in any direction at all, you'll define it as forwards. It's a very biased view of things. If I want to buy a drink, I just have to go down the cash machine, put my card in forwards, and money comes out forwards, I go to the bar forwards, I hand it to the barman forwards, the drink goes into the pint forwards, goes forwards into my mouth, forwards through my body, forwards out my dick, blah, blah, blah. Everything that we look at, we frame as happening forwards. That's why people think there's a direction to time. It's like, even if things went backwards, we'd call it forwards. If a car reverses over a dog, a squirrel looking at it on the fence would think the car moved forwards. He wouldn't think the car went backwards because it wasn't the pointy end that it was heading towards. Everything that moves has to have energy in it. And what I'm saying is whenever we think we're seeing the future constantly arriving, what we're really seeing is energy being released. If you put a 2-2 air gun with a pellet in that thing's head, probably wouldn't be spinning around like that for much longer. Because the energy would be there, but it wouldn't be able to be released. I'll do that and get a slide for you. I won't do that. We might say this candle could burn for a few hours, but it's directly related to how much energy is in the candle coming out. We might say this drag car could be quarter mile in 10 seconds, whatever, but only if it's got fuel inside it that's coming out. And you've got to consider that if you think you're seeing the future constantly arriving, but you only ever see it when energy is being released, then energy has got something to do with it. But if time on its own does nothing at all, it's just very tenuous. Anyway. If you get a balloon and you blow it up, and you let it go, it may fly through the air chaotically. It may fly through the air in quite an orderly way. It may even burst. In each of these cases, energy being released. If you get a balloon and you don't blow it up and you let it go, it will not fly chaotically. It will fall to the ground quite smoothly, but it will not burst. It'll only do these things if you put energy inside of it. You can't ignore that it will only do it if you put energy inside of it. The interesting thing I think here is that when you bang or burst the balloon, the bang is in there. It must be in there. And it's very odd that all those balloons that are blown up have just got this bang in them, sitting there silently, waiting to be released. It's very odd. And it is in there. You put it in there. You put the energy in there when you take a breath and you swish it in there, and then all these atoms and molecules are bouncing around. But my point is that they're all here now doing that. And it's not a future event that the balloon bursts. It's just something that happens as you stick a pin in it. Nothing is added, nothing's taken away. So the future doesn't arrive. There's a bottle rocket climb because time passes from the future to the past, or because fuel is released from the inside to the outside. Now obviously the fuel is released from the inside to the outside. If you bought a rocket that didn't have any fuel inside it and you lit it, nothing would happen. Which is the simplest answer that fits all observations. And to me, that's the simplest answer. The energy is released from the thing, and that's why it moves, and that's why it changes. It may move in a chaotic way, which we would call unpredictable, or an orderly way, which we would call predictable, or a sudden way, which we would call scary. So, if objects in the world could just exist, move and interact, would this explain all that we attribute to the future? Any questions? I'm going to say these questions won't turn out to be so much easier.
So you're saying there's something, like say that little squirrel was dead,
yeah.
And basically it's devoid of energy, so therefore it's just, that sort of proves it's just frozen in time, there's just always now, that just doesn't
it wouldn't be devoid of energy, it would still have the energy in it, but it wouldn't be able to, it'd be like cutting a cable on a car or something, but it's not a good example to use. But what I'm saying is that...
Yeah, but it's sort of like, it is sort of like, what you get in that is becoming more clearer to me through the release of energy explanation.
Yeah. And by energy I purely mean to scientific...
Because it moves and changes and interacts, that things just do that the energy's released, and that's...
Yeah, and it could be, if you look at the weather system of the Earth, there's a lot of energy in there, but it's very chaotic. But if you look at the way that the Earth spins on its axis, there's a tremendous amount of energy in the Earth that's spinning, but it's very, very stable and very precise. So to us, it's very predictable or modelable that the sun rises as it rises. Really what this thing does is it models where the sun is. It constantly points.
There's also a release of energy from the spring.
Yes, yeah. Anything like that. A car, I've got some pictures of that earlier, whenever we look at a clock, because Einstein says time is that which clocks measure. But with what I'm saying, for example, with the squirrel is, if time does not exist and we stick it into our sentences, it will immediately get confusing. If time does exist, it will work out. But when we talk about time, it often seems to get confusing. And I think that's a sign that either time doesn't exist or time is a very complicated thing. And most people, your top scientists would say, yeah, time is a very complicated and mysterious thing. Look at this paradox, look at that paradox, look at this paradox. And I'm saying, have you asked the question, what if things could just move and change? Now they might
saying that we claim that time is responsible for the movement of objects, and consequently that the energy argument to me doesn't overturn the idea of time. Time isn't responsible for an object moving, energy is, but time still calibrates that movement.
Yes, and this is the thing is that, well, if time is just a way of comparing motion, and describing movement and change, then we say, oh yeah, we'll forget about the past, we don't want to talk about the past now. You know what I'm saying? That Hawking literally says, hey, what if we fired a bullet into the past. He doesn't at the beginning of that conversation say, there's no such thing as the past, but just for fun, let's pretend there is, and then make this expensive program about it. If that's what he thought, he should have said that at the beginning. He doesn't say that. So he's saying the past exists. If we're saying that time is just another way of saying things move and change, which is kind of what I'm saying, then we're saying, oh yes, things change over time. But what we mean by that is things change, things change. You know, why do we add this second expression over time if it doesn't really mean anything other than, you know, things move and change over time means things move and change, things move and change. And it's a very misleading thing to do to stick that word time on the end, because it implies that there's a past and a future and that time exists and it flows. If time is a great notion, and it's a handy way of explaining that, yeah, things move and change, we compare their motion, but that's it. You know, all those 21 books should just be a single sheet of A4 there. Because if you look on the internet, you'll find 250 million entries about the mysteries of time. But if things just move and change, yeah, things just move and change. Now, I don't know how things just exist, or how they just move, or how they just change, but that, saying things move and change and there's time, doesn't clarify things anyway. Yeah, but I do know, I directly observe that things exist and they move and change. I don't know how gravity works or what it is, but I do see that it constantly seems to work around me, and that's my starting point. I'm not claiming anything beyond that. But if anyone's claiming there's an extra thing called time, I'd say, well, I'd like you to prove it, because what I've seen is I've read a lot of books that assume it exists, and they've never, Galileo, Newton, Einstein, in all of their works, they never said, and here's another proof of the past. None of them said, if you look at the contents of your mind, you might be misled into thinking that proves the existence of the past. But a real proof is this. None of them said that. They've all just assumed it. And I'll show you that Einstein does it and a couple of other books do it. So we'll move on. Any other questions?
Yes.
Yes. You still think about your drink?
Person blind from birth.
Yes.
We never observes anything moving and changing.
Yeah.
That means for them there's no time as we perceive it, because
They would sense things moving and changing, wouldn't they? They would feel
no winds going past their face.
Yeah. So that they would sense it, they would feel it. The contents of their mind.
Their own definition of it.
Say again, sorry?
They have their own version of...
Yeah, just they would have their own sensation of time if they believed in time, but...
Feel a puppy growing into a dog.
What?
If you feel a puppy growing into a dog, we can sense it.
Yeah.
Well, just assume
So
that
you
someone will
can
just
get-
bring another dog in.
It would sense that things change.
Okay.
No, I mean,
space of a day, the dog drove from a puppy to massive.
yeah, you could really feel it.
Yeah.
They do that. That would be so cool. It's a cat now. Didn't I tell you about that?
That's another show.
Any questions? So we're just looking at how things move and change now. I think we've had some questions.
Do you want to?
Have you got a question?
Aging, yeah.
Well, I just am curious. Meters, millimeters.
Yeah.
That's all a measure of time. Sorry, that's all a measure of distance.
Yeah.
But the distance doesn't actually exist. There's no such thing as a meter. It's just an agreed measurement, right?
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah.
And isn't time exactly the same?
It's a very good question. It's the thing with this subject is it's tricky. It's so annoyingly tricky. I wish I'd never started, honestly. And a lot of my friends do as wish. Say friends. It's debatable at the moment. We're in negotiation.
Things are changing.
It's a very good point. And this is the thing: is that we might say, oh yeah, well, you know, distances are kind of tricky as well. But if I get two objects here and I put them close together, and I find that I can't put that through there because the distance is too small, and that's what we mean by distance. We can then chop it up, we can call it inches or centimetres to talk about it, and then we can start saying, but inches don't really exist. They're mysterious. But that's a way of looking at it, but they're divisions of a distance, and distance does exist. The problem is that then we start looking at time, and we go, yes, hours are a unit of time, and hours are as kind of vague or mysterious to time as inches are to distance. And that seems to give ours a credibility. They can hijack it. It's almost like me saying if there were, I don't know, 3 spells to a mega spell, and claim that was a proof that spells exist. or that they're mysterious, or that they're subunits of something that does exist. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm saying you have to look at what you observe. Distances exist, things move and change. It's a hijacking to add this error. I know exactly what you mean. Aren't inches to distance as seconds are to time? And I'm saying no, because we don't observe time, we just observe that things move and change. Perhaps we would say that fractions of speed, we'd say, oh, this is travelling at 1/10 the speed of something else. Oh, but to tenths really exist. Does that make sense? I should have to clarify that. But yeah.
Is it not, Matt, is it not down to the sort of semantics of you're not happy with the notion of using time as an expression of something that we all recognise as, time, for want of not having a better expression? How would you quantify when you started talking this evening, when it's lecture? You could say, we use time as a convenience, but we know your lecture didn't start now, it was at some time prior to this, so how do you...
Well, there's a question which is...
you're saying everything's happening here and now, it clearly isn't, because I've had a pint of beer, which is now not a pint of beer.
Yeah,
it's not happening in the now.
A pint of beer existed when you walked in, and all that's happened is it's moved around a bit, and it's kind of got spread out a bit inside you. It's...
Over time.
as other things moved and changed. So everything's constantly moving and changing, and we can compare those things. One of the things we compare all of the movement and change to is the way that the Earth spins, because we're all stuck on it and it's very big. That's basically it.
And ageing. What about ageing?
We will get to ageing.
Could we do that soon?
We all age soon. I'm going to bridge the past, present and future. Look at why we can see the past but not the future, talk about ageing. The flow and direction of time, no temporal order of events. Surely there must be an order to events, as you were saying now. And this is, all I can say is, this is a complicated subject, it's so annoying, but what I'm explaining is very, very simple. Ask yourself, what if things just exist and move and change? And by saying ask yourself, what if things just exist and move, I don't mean don't ask yourself that question. I mean ask it. This is the car crash thing. If you try to look at it as if time exists, that's all you will ever see. The illusion's perfect and it works. That's why it's a persistent illusion. If you convince yourself that I really can just see out over there, you'll never convince yourself otherwise. It's only careful thought that will let you see it another way. And also the thing to realise is it doesn't matter. The world works exactly as if time functions and exists. That's again why it's a perfect illusion. But what it really boils down to is whether someone like Stephen Hawking or the people running CERN, if they start talking about sending messages into the past or people travelling through time, that's when I'm saying they're fundamentally wrong. Bridging the past, present and future. This is a thought experiment. Einstein was very big on thought experiments, and all that means is you imagine a situation, and it's great because you can just do it in your head. You don't have to buy anything, and you can just work it out a million different ways, and it can lead you to fascinating conclusions. So you get 3 students, engineering students, and you get a model of a bridge, designed for a bridge. You send them into each in separate rooms with some instructions. After a while, one of them comes out and says, the reason this bridge broke 100 years ago is because there's a design flaw over here. And that's, they obviously put too many cars on it and it collapsed. The next student comes out and says you shouldn't build this bridge because there's a design flaw, and if you build it, it's going to collapse here. There's a design flaw. The last student comes out and says you've got to phone up the bridge immediately and get people off it because it's going to collapse. There's a design flaw. Now the problem is that one of them thinks that they're thinking about the past, one of them thinks that they're thinking about the present, one of them thinks that they're thinking about the future. But all of them are just looking at a picture of a bridge and reading bits of A4 paper. Just because we think that we're thinking about the past is not really good enough proof that the past exists. And just because we think we're thinking about the future, likewise. All we're doing is we're thinking now about something. And all that proves is that we can be here now and that we can think now. It's a kind of weird thing, you can't get out of it. But before and after, ahead and behind. Imagine if you're on a ferry and you're leaving Calais, you're going to Dover, and you had a nice meal in Calais. Lots of things happening in Calais, but you're wondering about what's happening in Dover because you're going to be there in an hour. The thing is that whatever's happening in Calais is still happening. It's just getting further away and it's going to affect you less. The noise won't affect you, the pollution won't affect you, whatever. Whatever's happening in Dover is constantly happening. It's all happening. That's what I showed you in the very early slide. Everything is happening now. It must be. As these people get nearer to it, they'll become more aware of it. But it's still just constantly happening. It's not happening in the future. But they will see it as the future that they're heading into. Ahead and behind, before and after. What I'm trying to say is, if you use the language of time and you assume time exists, everything will click into it and it will seem to make sense. But if you just use the idea that things exist and we're in a different place or we're not in a different place, like all of us, we haven't been separated for hours, we've just been separated by distance. That's all we ever are separated by. It's always now, we're separated by distance. I can say I haven't seen you for a couple of weeks, but that's only because there were buildings in the way. Why can we see the past but not the future? Do you ever wonder, like we live in London, but if London was just a big flat deserty area, how many times we go, I saw Steve today. It's about 800 miles away. Why I can see the past and not the future, I read a book and it said, all of those books that I read, I go through them and I find the first reference to time, how whether they assume it exists or what their proof that it exists is, and so on and so on. All those books are about time. And one of them said, time exists because we can see the past but we can't see the future. Well, let's have a look. Still a cartoon I drew. A mad scientist with a Frankenstein's monster that he's built to attack his nemesis. And he doesn't realise, of course, that his nemesis is built an even larger Frankenstein monster. And it's obviously not a very good cartoon because you have to explain it in great detail, which is always a sign of a bad cartoon. But the point is this. When we talk of the past, we are really talking about the contents of our mind. Now, we might think or say or assume that that also relates to the past. But do we just assume that? Because if we just assume it, then we just assume it. That's like pointing to a map and saying, I've got a map. That means the territory really exists. You go, well, maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't. You've got to see the territory at some point.
It still exists whether you see it or not.
Okay, I can't argue with that. So, you'd have to start proving that to me. Yeah.
What did you say?
It's
Teach you
still
how.
there whether you can see it or not, it still is there.
Things exist, yeah, certainly stuff exists around, I agree with that. I mean, some people say, but if something is out of your sight, how do you know it exists? Has anyone ever uphold to that idea? So I worked out perfect proof. And all I need is your cash till machine card and your PIN number. I will then go out of sight for a period of time, so to speak, and when I come back you will be convinced that things do exist when you're not looking at them and that they do things when you're not looking at them. So, point is here, he might be thinking about the past. I hate that guy, 10 years ago he did that and the other, but he will literally be looking at the contents of his mind. He might assume that he's also thinking about the past, but that's yet to be proven. The point is, if you just make that assumption, when I look in my head, I'm looking at the past. That's just an assumption. You should have some extra proof. When you, so you can't see the future, but of course this guy is just here, he's existing. He thinks he's going to see him in 2 minutes, but he doesn't even think, he doesn't know what's going to happen in 2 minutes, but the bloke is here. You can only have a rough idea of what is physically around the corner. But we say we will be there in the future. But we're just there. It's a bit like saying the moon isn't here. Is the moon here or not here? Is the sun here or not here? What distance do things have to go before they're suddenly not here? Everything is here. So this thing's always here. There's no future. This thing's doing something, that thing's doing something. Either this is affecting that or not affecting that. So the reason we can see the past is because we can always see the contents of our minds because we're always walking around with the contents of our minds stuck to us. The reason we can't see the future is because we can't see through brick. The flow and direction of time. Stephen Hawking, time according to Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking thinks there are 3 arrows to time, 3 things that prove that time has a flow and a direction. And remember at the beginning, he doesn't just say, things just exist and move, but let's pretend there's something else to it. Thermodynamic arrow, cosmological arrow, psychological arrow. All this means is, things get more and more chaotic. If you drop a vase, it will tend to break, but you will tend never to see the pieces of the vase fly up and create a whole vase. So vases seem to break. Always leaves me with the question, where do all these vases come from if all they ever do is break? Surely we shouldn't have any left by now. They must be making them somewhere. I don't know how it works. The cosmological arrow. the universe expands rather than contracts. If you get a telescope and you look at the sky, you'll see that all the stars are receding from us. The universe is constantly expanding, doesn't do the opposite. So this seems to be a very good indication of time. Any photograph you had of the universe, if you had two photographs of the universe, you could tell which one was taken before the other. Psychological arrow, reflection of time, in which we remember the past but not the future, how we feel time passes. It's always bugged me when we say we feel time passing, because I don't get it, because just now, you won't feel it passing. I know Lucy, you might feel it's passing incredibly slowly right now, but that's just it. It's like if you were waiting for a bus, it would only be an amount of frustration growing in your head, or an amount of bladder pressure building in your bladder that would let you know you've been there for a while. If you've got a mum and a kid at a bus stop, the mum might be frustratedly waiting for this bus, but the kid wouldn't be waiting for the bus. And when the bus turns up, it just turns up for the kid. It's what you're thinking about it. And when you see those signs that says, 91, 3 minutes, that drives me mad, because all you know is that it's not 3 minutes. That's the only thing you know, is it? It's definitely either one's about to turn up, or I'm going to be here for 10 minutes. What it should say is 91, 500 yards, because then you'd know that it was just behind the clock tower. And that would be it. That would be the truth. The bus is never 3 minutes away, it's always just a distance away. That's my point. So what I'm saying with this, what this proves is that things can exist, and that they can move, and they can interact, and they can break, and that it's hard for things to reform. It doesn't prove that there's a past and a future and a thing called time that has a flow and a direction, and that it is needed to exist for things to move and change. It doesn't prove that. You'd only break that vase if you lift it up a height and dropped it. So it proves that vases break if you have energy. This proves that the universe is constantly expanding. It doesn't prove there's a past and a future or a thing called time that's needed to make that happen. We can compare that to a rotating hand on a thing we call a clock if we want, but that doesnn't prove there's a thing called time. It just proves that things exist, move and change. Likewise here, the experience we did earlier. The contents of our mind only really prove that things can exist and move and change. Aging.
That picture's well worth the second one.
Is it? I didn't make it. I should point out that I didn't make it. That's just so bizarre. I think, what is it? Is it an odd kind of porn that we shouldn't know about? I don't know. What is it? Okay. Introduction, the aging controversy, how wrong is wrong. Birth of Time by John Gribben, who's an expert on time and stuff like that. No child can be older than its own parent. But if you were to take some of the stories that appeared in the news media in the mid-1990s at face value, you would have thought that astronomers were stupid enough to believe such a thing could be true, blah, 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 blah. So this seems like a great statement. No child can be older than its parent. And when I buy a book and I read a statement like that, I think, can I get out of this? Because if I can't, then I've shown myself to be wrong. And I'm open-minded, I could be wrong. I have to be able to answer this question. A parent and his younger child. Here's a question. Go down the beach, get yourself some buckets, take 3 buckets of seawater from the sea. The question is, which sample of seawater is older on average, generally, whatever? Is it bucket C, which is down here to the east? Is it bucket B, which is off to the west? Is it bucket A, which is down in the south? 3 random buckets of water from a beach. Which sample of water is oldest? Does anyone think? Any views on that?
What did first?
In
Say-
what context?
Sea.
Talking about when it was first taken from the sea, or when the water actually...
Let's say we take them all together. Just take them all.
Well,
So-
you can't, because it's all mixed together.
So
the
we'd
water
have...
isn't...
Good.
It's just
Doesn't
all
age.
mixed up. So...
What does name?
Age. You want to put up Stephen Hawking and go, that time thing, I found something that doesn't age. That's weird, man. If we get in it, we will go back in time because everything else changes around us. So here's the point. It's a confusing...
Fluid. It's fluid.
Yeah, and it's
Because
all mixed
what
up.
you say about motion, it's not older necessarily. It's just where it is at that time. Is it in the sea? Has it evaporated up? Is it rain?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's older or not, unless
I agree,
you're
yeah.
talking about context.
Well, what I'm really saying is, look, if time exists, and it passes and it flows and things get older and younger, then which bucket is older? And what I think we'd logically have to say is, well, it's all pretty much the same age, because the sea is just constantly churning around and we pick these buckets at random.
I don't think That's a great example. Why didn't you pick something else, like coins? Which coin is older? Because then they're dated. And you can see. Why buckets of water from one vast sea?
Well, there's a good reason for that. And the reason is
To confuse us.
well, yeah, to trick and confuse you slightly, because, and there's a story which goes with it. I listened to a story on the radio. It's about a woman who had anorexia, and she was cured. And she was talking about how she was cured. And she said she was in the changing rooms of a clothes store, and she tried on an outfit, and she wanted to check it in the mirror. And she came out of the cubicle, but there was someone blocking her way, a very skinny woman, skinnier than her, was blocking her way. So she moved to the left, and you know how it happens in the corridor. So they moved to the left, and then she moved to the right, and they moved to the right, and then she moved to the left again because she was trying to get to the mirror. And then she realised that the woman she was looking at was herself in the mirror. And it was only because she hadn't seen it through her filters that she saw the reality of the situation. So she kind of tricked herself. And what I'm trying to do here is to trick you and to confuse you. Well, I don't know, what does the question make sense?
No.
Oh, that's fine, that's good. So we'll move on. There is a point. I wouldn't just leave it at that. Looking at aging, we're looking at what things are older than other things. Okay, now, which of these areas of matter is actually the oldest? This wave probably started off here and went all the way across there. It took about 30 seconds. This wave is probably only been going for about 20 seconds. This wave is probably only been going for about 10 seconds. So which wave is older, the 30-second one, or the 20-second one, or the 10-second one? Answers on a postcard, please.
Number 3.
It's a tricky question. Which wave is older? It's the same question. What I'm asking is which selection of water is older? The problem is that we might think that this wave is older. We might think that this is a new wave. Hey, new wave, man. And that's confusing because it just means that our eye is drawn to this particular sample of water because it's pretty to look at, or it's got more contrast, or whatever. So the question here is, which collection of matter is older? Is this collection of matter older? Is this collection of matter older? Is this collection of matter older? Surely whatever this collection of matter is doing, or was doing, or will be doing, this collection of matter will also be doing something. What I'm trying to say is that everything is constantly just doing something now. Changing.
Energy.
The idea that this is older than that is off. Now you might say, but this was made before that, and this was made after that. But all we're talking about then is the formation of stuff. Yeah, everything exists and it changes formation. That's it. Does that make sense? Something might sweep together and form a table while something else is falling apart. But so what if something's coming together and something else is falling apart? You know, if you have a building that's been demolished, is that a new pile of rubble or an old building?
Then wouldn't you just rephrase the question and say which formation of matter is older rather than which wave is older?
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of saying here, which for basically a vessel, what I'm saying is that all this stuff, if time exists, even if time exists, then surely everything is 13.75 billion years old and getting older at the same rate. It's interesting that it forms different clumps or different patterns, that's very interesting, but none of it is older. The idea that this stuff is older than that stuff is not true.
I don't get that.
Well, I saw a program, this guy had a rock, I don't know if it's on here, maybe it is on here. Alright, well we'll look at it from another angle, okay? If you ever bought a new car in a showroom, if I was ever to do that, I would insist on going to the factory and seeing just when it became new. Because that would be magic. Wouldn't that be great to see when things become new?
It's when they're
shiny.
When they've completed forming and
yeah.
That formation is new.
That's our opinion, isn't it?
Yeah, but there's something else before it was that, and there was something else before it was that.
It's always just
transformed, doesn't it? Just the energy's just
transformed.
Yeah, that's been packaged up as a new car.
Yeah.
So it became new when that package was completed and then presented as a new car.
What about this new pile of scrap?
Well, when it was after it was broken down from being a whole piece into bits like that, then it became that pile of scrap.
So we can say that things seem to happen after one thing after the other, and there's a slide about that as well.
Things change form, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's a new car, but it's not new matter.
No, that's what I'm saying. But the car, if we read the mechanicity, the matter is all the same age roughly.
Yeah.
But it's been presented as a new car.
Yeah.
So the age of that begins when that presentation is complete, and you say, right, it's ready. My new car is ready to be
Sure.
presented as a new car, then it becomes, that's when it started to be new.
And the question you have to ask is, if things could just exist and move and change, would that explain everything that we see? Well, if we look at these pictures here, is this an old car or a new car? Because the guy's wearing like a t-shirt, whatever. I'd like to get on with some other modern stuff in it, but this is a very new-looking old car. And this is a very old-looking, newish car. And this is a part of scrap that's hard to tell the age. It's a very old-looking old car, and it's a very new-looking new car, but all this stuff is the same age. None of it is older or younger than the other. Just because you've done something to it. If I do something to this, has that suddenly become you again? It's in a new position.
So, okay, talking about stepdaughter's son, characters, not real people, but hey.
Yeah.
So stepdaughter's older than his son, but you're saying he's not. How can you say which one's the eldest? If we're talking in terms of child and parent,
Yeah.
that stepdaughter version of the parent's been on the planet longer than the son has.
No, this stuff.
Well, where was the son?
This
then?
stuff. See, the problem is that if we...
Where was he?
He would have been around. If you imagine there's some people on a ship that's going on a long journey. There's a couple of people, man and woman on a ship, there's a load of food in the stores, and they're just going on this long journey, there's just them, and eventually they're bored of looking at the view, and they end up making love, and the woman gets pregnant.
Yeah, now that's the beginning of the new...
That's fine. And the kid lives and exists. And maybe that journey goes
From
on
that
for a
point,
few
yeah.
years, yeah? And eventually they come up to a port, and there's a kid, there's a 5-year-old kid there, and people start talking to the kid. And the question is, what are those people talking to? And they're talking to the food that was in the storerooms.
Yeah, but was assimilated.
They must be. The kid doesn't... If you look at your own body and you go, see this hand, the only reason this hand can possibly be here is because I ate it. I ate some food that became this hand. The stuff is always around us constantly. And so this stuff, when this stuff is doing something, this isn't in nowhere waiting to come into being. It's just some stuff somewhere.
No,
We get...
No, it's not in
No,
that
it's
form.
not.
Not in that
Yeah,
form.
not in that
It's
form,
not
I
in
agree.
that
So things
form.
can change form.
And this is where you've got to phrase the questions in the right way.
Sure.
Because otherwise you're duping us, you know? You need to ask exactly what you're meaning.
Okay, well what
You're
I'm...
not saying, when you pointed to that, you're not saying which is the eldest of this matter. You're
Yeah.
saying who's older, the father and the child. So we just assume the child from the beginning of the point of that life is
Yeah, but he's trying to break a perception of age, isn't he? That's
What I'm saying here, no child can be older than its own parent. That's the statement. And that kind of implies something. It implies that children are younger than parents.
Well,
So-
the form of the child is younger than the parent.
Well, you see, the form of, this stuff, and the form of this stuff, and the form of this stuff, the idea that if I break this up, it stops having a form for a while.
No, it just changes form, it doesn't stop
Yeah.
having form.
So,
It's no
well,
longer a
there's
table.
a couple of other pictures. We'll move on. There's a couple of others. So that I'm good. I'm good at bringing up the questions. I address those issues. Thank you. So this is an interesting slide to me. I find it just interesting. Yeah, this is a new old car. This is an old new car. This is some scrap. Is it old or new? I don't know. This is an old car. This is a new car. But it's all the same age stuff. We get drawn. We go, oh no, it doesn't count if it's this shape. It doesn't count if it can do calculations. It doesn't count if it can run. We think that, oh yes, being alive changes something. I do hear what you're saying about, for example, if you're making a house, surely you have to make the foundations, then the walls, then the roof. You can't do it in another order. Surely the foundations are older than the walls and the roof. But then again, if things can just exist and move and change, that explains everything you can see around you. This is rock. From a banded iron formation in northern Quebec, Canada, 3.75 billion years of age. It's one of the oldest rocks on the Earth. These rocks, which are meteorites, the only time travel machines in the early history of our planet, whatever, so it's saying these things about. What bugs me is if this is 3.75 billion years old, what happened the day before? Where was it? It just wasn't there, they went ding, and went, oh, let's start being a rock now. They're saying it cooled down 3.75.
It's a meteor. Yeah, but then it's
just the thing that is around is doing the thing. You know, I'm not saying I can explain how all this stuff is here. I think science can explain absolutely everything, apart from absolutely everything. But what I do observe is that things are here. And my question is, if things could just exist and move and change, would that explain everything? If, we'll move on, there's other slides that explain what I think you're thinking about. Temporal order. This is Einstein's book on relativity. He did relativity and then he wrote a book that we could understand, and says if you think about it, you can understand it. I'm going to make sure we get this so much time. Theory of relativity is intimately connected with the theory of space and time. This is his first reference to time, so he's talking about it as if it exists, in a sense. The single events which we remember appear to be ordered according to the criterion of earlier and later, which cannot be analysed further. Let's see if we can analyse it further, shall we? So he's saying we remember being young, then we remember doing this, we remember getting on the tube, we remember coming here. There's an order, criterion of earlier and later, which cannot be analysed further. Okay. This is another book, Introducing Time. I showed you those pictures at the beginning, very interesting book. Is time merely in the head? Which I think is what you're all thinking. I'm misunderstanding, whatever. Some guys go to a basketball game. We agree that the free throws by Smith in the second half occurred sometimes after his free throws in the first half. Don't worry about the details. Joe broke his finger when Smith stepped on it. So as two guys who are watching a basketball come home, they're talking about the game and they agree what happened. They agree the order of events. And this is a sign that there's a temporal order to events. It's a confirmation. And this is what Einstein's saying here as well. There's an order, earlier and later, which cannot be analysed further. This is like his cornerstone of why it's obvious that time exists. This book is all about time. This is on the first couple of pages. Are you running out of time?
Yeah, we got to shoot.
Don't worry.
Oh, sorry.
That's fine.
Riveting as it is.
Lucy, I'm so pleased you came here. Thank you for your concentration. Any questions?
See you later.
What time is it?
What time is it? It's now. Oh, that's fine. Thank you so much for coming. It's 10 to 11, so I don't want anyone to miss last orders, so we can have another break in a second. Please, thank you. See you later, Mike. Thanks.
See you later. All the best.
Anyone still with me? I'll get you down to one person. As soon as I get a car, it'll be the person dependent on the lift. So, what I'm saying is that Einstein and these guys here, this is the Introducing Time book, excellent book, whatever. They're saying people leave a basketball game and they agree. This guy got his finger broken, somebody trod on it, and different scores happened at different times, and their memories correlate. And this is proof that there's an order to events. Except in rare circumstances, everyone basically agrees for the most part on the time order of events. There is definitely something objective. That means it just happens whether we're looking at it or not. It's a real thing that just happens. It's not subjective, it's not our opinion. Objective and independent, so free from us, of our personal feelings about the time ordering. The objectivity, the fact that it happens whether we look at it or not, of the ordering of events in time proves that there is more to time than just our psychological mental sense of its passage. So, I don't mean to be rude to people, but this is what the guy's saying. The fact that their memories correlate is independent. You could video it and compare two videotapes and they would line up. And this is a proof that time exists and it has a temporal order that cannot be disputed. That's what the guy's saying, and now I'm going to question that. We store and record events in an order. And if you run a business, you might have one of these paper spikes, and you put things down and they're on order. There's an order that seems to be agreed and confirmed. But what does this prove and what does it not prove? Imagine you went to a football match or a basketball game, I just couldn't be bothered to do different slides, and you have a video camera and you video the game, and someone lines up a shot and they take a shot and they score a goal, and you record it on the camera. So you can go to a magazine and you say, I've got this great sequence of film about this goal, this shot. And the guy goes, that's brilliant, I'll buy it. I can't remember what his name, scoring a goal, that will be front page stuff, and you can sell it. So what we have to agree is that if there is a recorded sequence, then there is a recorded sequence. Does anyone disagree with that? Okay. Imagine there's a fault with the camera, and instead of recording the whole game, it kind of looks like it is, but it's only ever recording one frame and deleting it, recording a frame and deleting it, it's only ever recording one frame. So can we agree that if there isn't a recorded sequence, then there isn't a recorded sequence? It's the same question. I'm not saying there is or isn't, I'm just saying we can agree that if there isn't, there isn't, because there isn't. So in the real 3D world, if there is a sequence of events, if I move over here, that's a sequence, an order. I was there, I am here now. if there is a sequence created and recorded in time, then there is a sequence created and recorded in time. And that means that there's a flow and a direction and an order. If you've got three things, you can have a direction, you can put them in order. You know, you can say this happened after that, whatever. But if there isn't a sequence created or recorded in the past or coming from the future, then there isn't. And if you look around you now, all you'll see is that it's constantly now, it's not changing. We have this idea, but yes, of course, there's a past and these things are in the past, but hopefully I've undermined that sufficiently to show you that it could be explained if things just move and change. And it's a weird thing, you have to kind of step out of it. It's great to, what I'm saying is if there is a sequence, there is, and if there isn't, there isn't. If we go to the film, the magazine, we say, I'd like to sell you the sequence of pictures of the gold. And he says, have you got the sequence? I go, no, it's not recorded anywhere. And he goes, well, there isn't one that I can print then. And he goes, no, there isn't. And if as we move and change, the future isn't arriving, the past isn't receding, then there isn't a sequence, and there isn't a direction, there isn't a flow. It's just us moving and changing now.
But it's also a release of energy, the goal anyway, isn't it?
It's only a release of energy. But yeah, sorry?
Well, alright, you go to the newspaper, you don't have the recorded footage, but you can still describe the events that happen. You'd have the point of view of the footballer that can tell you that it happened.
And where would that record exist? Would it exist in your head?
Well, it's in their head, and then they would
Sure.
repeat it and it'd be down on paper.
Or if you were an artist, you could draw it.
Yeah, and similarly with the recording. That's like a brain watching it, recording it.
Absolutely, yeah, your mind.
So they're all versions of it.
So that proves that people exist and that they can look at things and that they can...
And the same people can have the same experience.
They would all agree, yeah?
Yeah.
You have 10,000 people looking at it. So that proves that people exist and they can look at things and they can store a record of what happens. And get back to that slide of the thingy. So that, for that to happen, if time passed and things moved and changed over time, that would explain it. But if things just move and change, that would also explain it. It would explain how all those people could have the same sequence of images in their head. If they all had cameras, they'd all have the same sequence of images on their cameras. But all that proves is that things are here now and that they can move and change and interact. It doesn't prove that there's an extra thing called time. It doesn't prove that there is a past or that there is a future.
No, but you'd have the order of which the events occurred.
That order would only be recorded in it here. It would only be recorded, where's that? This is an order of stuff. But really it's just a load of stuff.
But before the ball goes into the goal, it has to be kicked.
Yeah.
Sent that way, so you kick it before it hit the goal.
Yeah, I understand, you're right. Well, the real question is, where is the ball now? Because we're talking about, see, when you talk about before the ball is somewhere, am I going backwards? If you talk about, when you talk about before the ball did this, after the ball did that, what you're really doing is looking at the contents of your mind and talking about the contents of your mind, which are here now. But you're talking as if it also relates to the past. It's a thing you have to step out of.
Yeah. I'm trying.
Don't worry. It's honestly, it's a mind F-U-C-K. So anyway, right, here we go. So I'm saying that you've got to ask this question. There's a slide you missed. I'm saying that if you don't follow an instruction, it might seem not to work, but you have to follow the instruction. And the question is, what if things just exist now and move and change? You'll never ever see it. If you insist that time exists, it's a bit like going to a magic show and insisting that magic exists. Everything you see will make sense, everything will seem to be confirmed. You might never ask the question, what if it's just trickery? You have to ask the question, what if it's just trickery? And what I'm saying here is you have to ask, what if everything's just here now and it moves and changes? There's more time.
Even saying move and change, if you say things move, implies a sequence. It is in one place and then it is in another place.
Yeah.
I've got a slide that will explain that.
Good.
Basically what this slide says is which of these things happened first, alright? Is this glass being here first or is this glass moving first? What's the sequence?
You put that down before you move that.
But that was somewhere and this was somewhere. Everything's always just somewhere and everything's just moving. But the question is, in this case now, which is happening first? Is that glass just being there first or is this glass moving first?
Say again?
I know, it's confusing. Look at it another way.
It's still there.
Look at it another way. If things can just exist and move, will that explain what you're seeing?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you consider that things can just exist and move, that explains what you see. If you get this idea of time and you keep trying to jam it in, things happen before or after other things. What's happening? Is this speaker happening before the speech or after the speech?
Question.
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand you, that's why I'm asking you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Honestly, there are no
What
silly
if-
questions.
What if you had 2 pints of milk in the fridge?
Yeah,
You took 1 pint out
yeah,
and left it on the side.
yeah.
And then a bit later on you took another pint out and left that on the side. Now one's going to be colder than the other.
Yeah.
Because one came out of the fridge before the other one did.
Yes.
How do you explain that? That's
Bad
before.
milk management.
Energy will always dissipate in
Yeah.
space. It's like the planet gets cooler as Mars got cooler
Well,
down
there
to
was-
nothing.
there was a
Energy.
sequence.
It's purely energy. I mean, if you lived in Iceland and you took one out of the fridge, you might find the one you took out of the fridge freezes solid.
Yeah,
It's
when
how
you
much
take it
energy you put
outside.
through something. But what I want to do, if anyone wants to get a drink, it's 11. So, because I fancy a drink, is what I'm saying. So should we take a short break? And anyone need a drink? We won't get through all the things. I mean, I'm happy to do the next few. All right, let me
How
try.
much would you anticipate
Go and get a drink.
it being snacks? We need to.
Sure.
We need to get the other side of London.
Oh, really? You walk back? Oh, God.
Yeah, we're going to go and dissipate as well.
Okay, well, we'll pretty much wrap up. Let me just run through these last slides fairly quickly. We're only on slide 146. I think.
Out of how many?
Halfway then.
How many?
146. We see if I can find some interesting things. Here's that question: which of these is happening first? Is one ball being first, or is the other thing moving first? And if you squeeze it into this time thing, it'll get confusing. But if you just consider, hey, everything's just here now, moving and changing. We've had some questions. Genuine time travel. This is a bit too complicated for now. This is the interesting thing. If you look at these two objects, they're neck and neck. Not because they're clocks that track time accurately, but just because they're two machines that are built to very similar specifications. These two things are neck and neck, but we say it's because they're clocks and that they track time accurately, but they don't. They're just machines that release energy accurately. So you can have these things in different places. You go, oh, we're both showing at the same time. You go, no, you're just showing that things change at the same rate in different places. Einstein said time is that which clocks measure, but what clocks really measure is the release of energy from some weights or from a spring or from a battery. That's what they really measure. That's what they really show. The idea that they also show time is an assumption. Not really proven. Let's do with that. Relativistic effects, we won't worry about that right now. Special relativity, I think a little bit late for that in the evening. This guy is meant to be a genuine time traveller. We'll finish on this guy. Valery Polyakov, and he was in space, longest ever space flight, 437 days, 18 hours, and he was travelling at great speed over a great distance, and this meant that Einstein's relativistic effects actually had an effect on him. He's technically a couple of thousandths of a second younger than he should be. Now, it doesn't seem to matter, but it does matter, because that implies that he's a real time traveller and that he's travelled into the future, 2,000ths of a second. Doesn't matter, but if we exaggerate it, imagine that he stayed up in space for so long that his clock was 6 months out of correlation with the Earth clock. In theory, you could do this if you sent this guy up fast enough. And it's not just that his clock would be 6 months out, his entire body would be 6 months less change. This is a scientific fact. And people would say that this implies that he's a time traveller. The reason being that when he stepped out of his capsule, when he landed back on Earth, his ground crew could legitimately say, looking at their accurate clocks and calendars, happy 53rd birthday, Valery. But he would say, but I am only 52 and a half. And his clocks and calendars would correlate, the length of his fingernails, his hair, everything would correlate. So it seems to be proof of time and time travel. But the point is, and it would look to him as if he had travelled 6 months into the future. And it would look to them as if he'd come out of the past by 6 months. And this is quoted as an example of why time and time travel and everything that Einstein says about time is correct. And I'm going to dispute it slightly. There was no time travel into the future. All that happened was he changed at a different rate. Sounds like I'm mixing around with words, but I'm not, because if you say that there's time, there's a future and a past, you've got to at some point prove these things. You know, otherwise you're selling me a bit of territory just by showing me the map. You've got to see some proof of them. If he just changed more slowly than the crew on the ground, that would have the effect. And here's a diagram. This is what I call a rate machine. Instead of sending him out of sight, which makes everything confusing, you build a machine where he changes more slowly here on the ground, so we can look at him. And if we do that and we video him, what we'll find is that the clocks on the outside of this machine run at a slightly faster rate than the clocks on the inside. So we are right, this is the problem. If we leave him in long enough, we could create that effect where he comes out, he thinks he's only 52 and a half, they think he's 53, whatever. But if you made such a machine, which you cannot make, this is just a thought experiment, you could still play table tennis with the guy. All that would happen is that in here things would be moving very slowly, and as the ball came out it would move quickly, and then it moved quickly, and then it would move slowly, it moved quickly, and it moved slowly. But he would just be changed more slowly. No one would ever be drifting into the past, no one would ever be coming out into the future. Put it another way, he can ask you for next week's lottery numbers. You can ask him to go back and kill Hitler, because it's all here now, but one thing would be changing more slowly than the other. And all I'm trying to show you in that final slide is how, if you assume that time exists and you force that idea onto things, things will get confusing and paradoxical, which will make you think time is very complicated. But surely it's worth asking this question: what if things could just exist and move? And in particular, you ask that question about the contents of your own mind. What if the contents of your own mind just change? Could that give you the impression that there's a thing called time with a flow and an order and a direction? The reason we think the past accumulates and cannot be changed is just because we have a load of memories that it makes sense not to change. The reason we think the future arrives is because we see things changing in orderly or chaotic ways.